Thank you so much. Have you ever noticed how workplace quotas aren't inclusive? Let me give you an example. I spent 30 years as a senior manager in policing, a job that doesn't have a great reputation for being inclusive. 3 police forces in England and Wales this year have just 1 black police officer. And can you believe that 1 has got none at all? But this isn't just a policing issue. It affects nearly all businesses. So if CEOs can talk so eloquently about recruitment campaigns targeted at underrepresented groups and courses to help them get promoted and staff support networks, then why are we getting it so wrong? Well, the reason's simple. Imagine if I wanted to attract a more diverse range of wildlife to my garden. How would it go if I went out into the countryside to round up as many wild animals and birds as I could and coax them back? What if they're then faced with a stark concrete wilderness and then just throw into the mix my slightly vicious pet cat, who we're all a little bit scared of and just affectionately call Colin Farrell? How likely are they to stay? Now, I exaggerate for effect a little bit, but if you think about it, that's just the approach that most organisations take when they're trying to improve their diversity quotas. Maybe, just maybe, we'd be better reflecting on why our gardens aren't quite the attractive havens that we think they are. Now, it's nearly 30 years since black teenager Stephen Lawrence was murdered. And Lord Macpherson's review into the failings of the organisation contained nearly 200,000 words, but people only really remembered 2. Institutional racism. And what was the industry response to that? Yep, out with the butterfly nets, trying to scoop up as many ethnic minorities as you possibly can. You will struggle to find a recruitment poster now that doesn't have a picture of a bloke in a turban or a woman in a hijab. But if the garden's still concrete, then they ain't coming. And that's played out. Nearly 3 decades of intensive effort. And not only are we still not recruiting enough black police officers, but the ones that are in the job are 50% more likely to resign. And the reason is, no force has properly looked at themselves and asked, what is it about us that isn't inclusive? Let me just say that one again. No force has properly looked at themselves and asked, what is it about us that isn't inclusive? Because quotas tell us nothing about being inclusive in any sector. Nearly 54% of taxi drivers in the UK are from an ethnic minority. But before we get too carried away congratulating them, let me tell you that only 2% of drivers are women. So do you see the point? Taxi driving could be the most or the least inclusive job out there, depending on which quota you choose. But it's actually much bigger than that. Chasing quotas means we define people by our differences, and that's massively oversimplistic. It's a bit like seeing a flash of colour whiz by in our concrete garden, and what do we say? Oh, a dragonfly. But there are 7,000 species of dragonfly in the world. So we just ponder that for a second. 7,000 different sizes, shapes, colours, habitats, climates, diets, and we just clump them all together just for our convenience. So how do you pigeonhole yourself? I'm guessing that you're so used to doing it that you will easily tick which boxes that you fit. Some people actually find it really difficult. I would argue that we should all struggle a bit more, because at a DNA level, none of us are entirely black or white. Brain scanners would suggest that we're all bisexual to a degree. We're on spectrums for all of these things. Even Audi drivers will use their indicators sometimes. But more importantly, our obsession with categorising people in this way is one of the first steps towards building prejudice. And doing it with good intent is no less discriminatory, and it can marginalise, even victimise people. My eureka moment came when I had to identify people from diverse backgrounds to go for a promotion scheme. Because if you want to know why people aren't applying, just ask the straight white guy. It's obvious, isn't it? I knew 2 people who were perfect. They were both very, very capable, and both women. So they ticked our underrepresented groups box. They were all excited. I'm out there with my butterfly net. And they agreed to go to a company briefing and keep an open mind. But then they came back and said it wasn't for them, they weren't going to apply. No problem, I thought. I'm a coach. I can help you with your imposter syndrome. Not in the least bit patronising. But their response really surprised me. And they said, no, no, no. We know we could do it, but we watch you lot, the hours that you work, the pressure that you're under, and we just don't want it. But thank you for considering us. It means a lot. And that was it. So let's just unravel why we've got this the wrong way round. Two people who don't fit the existing mould are identified and encouraged to go for promotion. They're willing to call out an unhealthy long hours culture, something we know discriminates against women specifically. But before they could get into a senior enough position where they could do something about it, that very culture put them off. But surely none of this matters. Enough women did apply, and people from other diverse groups. We met our quotas, pat on the back from the chief and a chocolate biscuit. It was happy days. But it's not that simple. Just because somebody ticks a diversity box, it doesn't necessarily mean that change will follow. There's a really good chance that they already fit the mould, and there might already be dead behind the eyes workaholics, or superintendent, as they've more politely called us to our faces. But you get the gist. If they are truly different thinkers, then they'll probably go through a process called socialisation. And that's where we all learn the attitudes and behaviours that are required to comply and conform and be accepted. So it's a little bit like planting a mixed herbaceous border in our garden and then spraying it with perfume. What you end up with is all the flowers might look very different, but they all smell the same. And that's not what diversity is about. You need to keep the richness and purity that you get from the melting pot of people from all different backgrounds. Because research tells us that diverse teams innovate more and they're more productive. But there's a condition. Only if it's safe enough for people to actually be different. And that's the point we're missing. Inclusion is what gives diversity its impact. And that's about how people are treated, how things feel, the effect of hierarchy. What happens if you make a mistake or disagree, and who's got all the influence? And after a couple of years away, I actually returned back to my organisation. And there were posters all over the walls, all about the importance of well-being, you know, the sort of thing. And they included not working long hours. They were genuinely really encouraging. But you know my first thought? These are actually really good. I bet somebody was up late designing them. And that's the point. It didn't actually feel different. The latest email I got from one of the executive team was 3 a.m. Another senior colleague rang me at midnight to talk through a report they were drafting at home. So just telling people not to work long hours is like telling a coal miner not to get their face dirty. It's less of a personal choice, more what people recognise is needed to get the job done in that environment. What I actually experienced was a concrete garden that had been covered in artificial grass. It looked fantastic, but it's fooling no one. True wildlife havens take years to evolve and develop and grow. They need constant attention, and you need to be prepared for them to be really messy for a while. Now, it's easy to let the scale of that task put you off. So I'd like to share my favourite ever quote with you. It's from a guy called Martin O'Malley, and he used to be the governor of the state of Maryland. And he says, reversing deforestation is complicated. Planting a tree is simple. Oh, I love that. So let's think about planting some trees. If we're serious about this, we all need to work together. So let me show you what I mean. You've all come to TEDx today to hear new ideas and stretch your thinking. It's a real credit to you. So just give yourselves a round of applause. You deserve it. Go on. Perfect, thank you. Now, you don't have to do this, but what I'd like you to do now is try something a little bit different. I'd like you to applaud as normal, and then settle down into a slow, rhythmic hand clap, and then finish with normal applause. So that's normal clapping, slow hand clap, normal clapping, in that sequence. Over to you. Perfect, brilliant, well done, well done. Apart from over here, right in the front row, very attractive lady in the orange. right in the middle of the slow hand clap, there was a quick, who heard that? Just a couple of you in the immediate area, okay. If you think it's, oh, how did that feel, madam?
Weird and self-conscious.
Okay, weird and self-conscious, okay. If you think it's a bit strange that I'm identifying and picking on individual members of the audience, let me introduce Mrs. H, everybody. Now, after 25 years together, I'm sure you can imagine she doesn't have a great deal to applaud me for. So we have to engineer these things, and I actually primed her to do that before we came, just to illustrate a couple of points. The first one being, how did the whole clapping thing happen? Who led? Who followed? I didn't hear or see anybody stand up and say 3, 2, 1 after me, but you all synchronized perfectly. What's that about? Well, the reason is we like to think of ourselves as independent thinkers, but actually we're social animals. We like to follow and conform with our in-group. It makes us feel comfortable and secure. If we're going to do it differently, we like to have permission. Now, I actually gave you that. If you rewind the tape, you will hear me say you don't have to do this. But it passed nearly all of you by because I was insincere when I said it. And I followed it up with another option, which was instinctively the one that you knew I wanted you to follow. And that's happening in organisations all over. Bosses are saying all the right things. I want to hear your opinions. Challenge me. It's okay to disagree. But we all have a sense of whether they truly mean it or not. And most don't, not deep down. The difference with Mrs. H is when I asked her to do this before, she trusted me and she genuinely believed that I meant it. The second point is that when somebody does try and disrupt, then most people miss it completely because they're too busy conforming with a bigger group. If you are close enough to it, then the tendency then is to ignore it or even sideline the person. Now, our daughter's in the audience today and knew nothing about this. And I wish you could have seen her face when Mrs. H went off script. It was priceless. I knew what she was thinking. You're ruining Dad's TED talk. What on earth are you doing? All of these little subconscious cues, they add up and they make us feel weird and self-conscious. So we internalise our different thinking and we conform. This stuff's deeply embedded in our psyche. But we all share responsibility for being positive disruptors. So if the only person we can truly change is ourselves, then let's start there. What if you're a boss? Well, I'm guessing that you're pretty good at talking about psychological safety and value indifference and all the other things that are trendy. That's a great start, but the rhetoric needs to become action. So disrupt yourself. Listen to your different thinkers. And I'm not talking about staff surveys and forums with the CEO. They're mainly artificial grass. I'm talking about deep and profound understanding of people's lived experiences at work. But Colin the cat's a bit defensive. They take any feedback as criticism. Their insecurities need managing, otherwise your people are just going to carry on clapping in time. Maybe you're Colin. That could be difficult to accept and deal with. When I was working at a national level, I actually led on a series of events where we suspended hierarchy and over-politeness and political correctness. And the conversations that followed were really honest and open and powerful in a way that I'd not heard before. Some of the experiences were difficult to listen to, and they contradicted the espoused values of the organisation. But that just makes them all the more important to get out there. What I learned was the appetite is there and people will engage, but please repay that courtesy with action when they do. So what if you've got a boss? Let's face it, that's most of us. Well, I'd say support them. Engage where you can. Identify the barriers and the blockers. Suggest new and better ways of doing things. Ask what became of that big event that they invited you to or the feedback they asked you for. Hold your leaders to account, but do it in a positive way. Now, I started out by saying that most organisations miss the point when they're trying to be inclusive. All the time we externalise this and make it about the underrepresented groups themselves, it's not only ineffective, it's discriminatory in its own right. Now, none of us can reverse deforestation single-handedly. But if we all plant enough trees, then quotas for things like disability, ethnicity, sexuality, and all the other protected characteristics will just look after themselves. Not only that, other differences like personality and class and lifestyle will all be able to flourish without people feeling the need to conform. Looking inside is actually really difficult to do. It takes personal courage and humility, but embracing that simple principle will truly revolutionise what it means to belong. But only when we stop chasing dragonflies and start creating the gardens that attract them. Thank you.